Tencent had already succeeded with QQ's desktop chat app, which had now evolved into a website portal with online games and other internet services. But in 2010, mobile internet was beginning to rise in popularity very quickly. Many Chinese people began using a smartphone but not a computer. Pony was paranoid that with the switch to mobile happening, a new startup could displace their dominance. So he decided Tencent needed to create this new startup themselves. Internally within Tencent, Pony created 3 separate teams to work on a new mobile messaging app, meaning they were competing against each other, and also competing against Tencent's desktop app QQ. This practice of teams internally competing at Tencent is normal. In fact, the culture of Tencent has been described as a shark womb, referencing how some unborn sharks cannibalize siblings in the womb to ensure their own survival. So basically, rather than put all their eggs in one basket, multiple teams at Tencent work on a concept, like a new mobile chat app in this case, and the best survives. Or as Pony himself has said, you either wait for someone else to kill you, or you do it yourself first. So Tencent began work on their mobile chat app that they wanted to essentially be a clone of WhatsApp and Kik, a free mobile chat app where people could send messages to their contacts using Wi-Fi or mobile data. Interestingly, Tencent had actually tried to buy WhatsApp for $10 billion rather than starting a new app from scratch. But because Pony Ma had to have back surgery, the discussions got delayed. In that time, Mark Zuckerberg swooped in and bought WhatsApp for $19 billion. And some think the possibility of Tencent buying WhatsApp prompted Zuckerberg to close the deal so quickly. Either way, after the WhatsApp deal fell through, Tencent decided to pursue their own chat apps instead, and in January 2011 they launched WeChat, although in China it has the name Weixin. Unlike QQ, which had been developed for desktops, WeChat was specifically made for mobile. Despite this, the app was not a massive hit right away, but it did start to gain traction in China when Tencent added a feature called Push to Talk, which allowed people to easily record a voice note and it would convert what you said into a text message. This was immediately a very popular feature, but once again, it was copied from someone else, an app called TalkBox. You see, at first, Tencent had offered to buy TalkBox, but whilst negotiations were ongoing, Tencent just replicated TalkBox's app within WeChat by themselves, and inevitably beat TalkBox with their superior resources. In later years, companies in China would learn that an offer from Tencent was actually an offer you couldn't refuse. You either lose your company by selling to them, or lose your company by them copying and crushing you. At least if you sell your company, you make some money. When Pony was asked about this at a conference in China, he said, "In America, when you bring an idea to market, you usually have several months before competition pops up, allowing you to capture significant market share. In China, you can have hundreds of competitors within the first hours of going live. Ideas are not important in China, execution is." So WeChat was now gaining momentum in China, and just like QQ, Tencent did not want to keep it as just a chat application. In fact, because WeChat was a mobile app that people would always have with them wherever they were, Pony quickly realized that the amount of services they could connect to WeChat was seemingly limitless. For example, within WeChat's app, Tencent introduced a feature called Moments, basically their version of Facebook or Instagram, a real-time social media feed of posts, images, and articles. Following the success of this, they added a blogging service called Public Accounts, so people could write articles which could then be shared on Moments. There was also official accounts, allowing publishers to distribute content and businesses to distribute products and services.
This would be like the equivalent of following their newsletter, for example. But nobody in China really uses emails very much, so they're more likely to use WeChat to follow brands that they're interested in.
By 2012, WeChat had 100 million users. Remember, it only launched in 2011, thus making it the fastest social media growth in history, taking only 433 days to hit 100 million users. For context, it took Facebook around 5 years. A year later, in 2013, WeChat was at 300 million users. But the key to WeChat's eventual dominance in China was that Tencent just kept bundling more features in this same app. For example, they added quirky features like Drift Bottle, which was a service within WeChat to help people find new friends or dates. You essentially put either a voice or text message in a virtual bottle, throw it into a virtual sea, and then another random user picks it up and decides whether to reply to your message or throw it back for someone else to get. This actually became a really popular feature, with many Chinese people making genuine friendships and relationships through it. And for some people, it became a hookup app. Tencent also created Friends Nearby for a similar purpose, which was like an early version of Tinder and helped WeChat grow even faster. But one of the most crucial developments for WeChat came about kind of by accident. You see, in China, it's a tradition that during the Lunar New Year, people charitably give away red envelopes and packets containing money. So WeChat decided to create a red packet function within their app so people could digitally send red packets to people, which transferred real money to their accounts. During that holiday, over 75 million red packets were sent via WeChat. This led Tencent to a clear realization: mobile payments were the future. This feature that was meant to be a fun little temporary thing over the holidays ended up leading Tencent to create WeChat Pay, their mobile payments platform to digitally transfer money. Before long, WeChat's wallet feature was not just used to send payments to other people, but as a way to pay for things in shops, and in fact, basically anything where money needed to be sent or paid. Rather than carrying around a credit or debit card, it was easier to just use WeChat since their bank details were already connected.
They won't ask for cash because nobody's really paying for anything with cash nowadays in China. In fact, even if you give them cash, they might not actually be able to accept it.
Once again, this may seem like an obvious feature today, but back in 2013 when it launched in China, this mobile payment function was an incredible feature, and hence helped WeChat become even more popular. And as more people in China started predominantly using smartphones, eventually WeChat surpassed QQ. Even though they were both started as chat services run by Tencent, WeChat was definitely better for mobile, and mobile was becoming much more widely used in China. By 2015, WeChat crossed 500 million users. Of course, whilst the app name hasn't changed, chatting is now just a tiny fraction of what WeChat does. Which leads us to the most crucial feature of all for WeChat, the feature that turned it into the super app it is today that dominates the lives of almost everyone in China. In January 2017, WeChat launched a feature called Mini Programs that allows users to access tens of thousands of other apps within WeChat's own app, completely bypassing the need for an app store. So for example, instead of you having to download a separate app for every single restaurant, hotel, or shop you go to, they'd all just have a mini program within WeChat. This not only allowed WeChat to connect itself to people's offline lives as well as online, but it helped cement WeChat as the everything app. Even before this, Tencent had created so many of their own services bundled into WeChat, like payments, games, and dating, but this mini programs feature meant there was basically no need to even have other apps on your phone, because services from other businesses were now available via WeChat as well. For example, China's dominant ride-sharing platform Didi have their own mini program within WeChat. So if you want a taxi, you don't need a separate app. Or there's a mini program within WeChat for food delivery or tracking parcels and pretty much everything else you can think of. So to demonstrate this, let's imagine for a moment you're a Chinese citizen and you're meeting a friend for dinner. You call them through WeChat to confirm the plans, you book your taxi to the restaurant via WeChat, in the taxi you play games and browse the news via WeChat, send your friend your location via WeChat, access the restaurant's mini program via WeChat, which means you can view their menu via WeChat, then take a photo of your food and post it on your social feed, which is on WeChat, pay for your meal via WeChat. Then afterwards, if you want to go and watch a movie, guess what? You book your tickets through WeChat. Essentially, imagine your life without a smartphone at all, and in China, that's what life would be like without WeChat. Okay, I think I've said the word WeChat too many times. But anyway, as a result of this mini programs feature, Tencent has essentially become the gatekeeper to the market for other businesses, since people don't really need to use the App Store when WeChat has everything inside of it. So companies almost have to partner with Tencent in order for their services to be used. But this means Tencent can effectively tax all other companies by taking a percentage of the revenue generated through their mini programs.
WeChat is linked to other companies, so you go through WeChat to another app or website and then you buy through there, but you pay with your WeChat.
Now, what's interesting is that an all-in-one everything app like this has been suggested outside of China as well. In fact, even quite recently, Elon Musk talked about X, a super app similar to WeChat.
If you're in China, it's basically, you kind of live on WeChat, it does everything. And we don't have anything like that outside of China. Such an app would be really useful.
But it was quickly shut down. We have enough concerns about big tech and social media without one single company controlling everything. But now you can see why Tencent has become a money machine. Because unlike many of the big tech giants in the West, such as Facebook and Google, Tencent doesn't need to rely so heavily on advertising revenue. In fact, some Tencent staff joke about how Facebook's business model is very primitive. There's a quote from a Tencent employee saying, "When you have a billion users, the last thing you should be thinking about is how do I sell them a ton of ads. What you should be thinking of instead is how to ensure you keep these users happy so you don't drive them away because you're annoying the hell out of them." And that's what's notable about WeChat. It has kept a pretty clean interface and doesn't spam users with ads. It doesn't need to. They make so much money through microtransactions since they're involved in so many aspects of people's lives. When you have over 1 billion people using your app for so many different parts of their life every single day, those small fees on every transaction add up in a massive way.
How would you describe it to you? How important is it?
Half of my life.
Basically, everybody there uses it. At least everybody I know that is age 70 or younger in China uses WeChat.
Basically, the app can help you with all aspects of life, literally, in China.
However, Given that WeChat dominates people's lives in China, you may wonder why it's not so popular outside of China. Whilst we don't have confirmation of exactly how many people use it outside of China, estimates suggest possibly up to around 100 million, which is decent, but it's a tiny fraction compared to the well over 1 billion people inside of China who use WeChat. And most of the people who use WeChat outside of China are Chinese expats living abroad, or people needing to connect with others who are in China. So, if WeChat is so useful in China, why didn't the rest of the world adopt it? Why doesn't Tencent expand more in other countries? Well, this is where things get dark. The simple answer is that the same reason Tencent's apps are so big in China is precisely the reason they're not so big anywhere else. It's time to look at Tencent's complicated relationship with the Chinese government. Before we get into Tencent's current relationship with the CCP, it's important to understand how things all began. In 1979, the then leader of China designated an area called Shenzhen as the first test zone of his new economic plans. This would be the first part of China where capitalist business models were allowed, and this began China's rapid ascent to becoming a global superpower. Nowadays, Shenzhen has been dubbed the Silicon Valley of China, as it's home to many of China's tech giants, including Tencent. But the Chinese government's plan was essentially to give some Chinese companies a huge amount of freedom as long as they were benefiting the country overall. So when companies like Tencent and Alibaba capitalized on the internet and built massive user bases, China was happy to allow them to build such dominant companies by any means necessary without any real regulation, as long as they were benefiting China and the CCP overall. They felt it elevated the image of China and Chinese entrepreneurship by having these hugely successful companies. It also meant that rather than foreign companies succeeding in China, like the big American tech giants, instead local Chinese companies would dominate, as the government made it mandatory for foreign companies to partner with a local Chinese company. And finally, the CCP knew that if some Chinese companies became huge empires, then they could invest in lots of other companies, both in China and abroad, thus by proxy allowing China to have a lot of influence on the world and control the narrative they want. So basically, for the Chinese government, Tencent was an appealing prospect. Having access to so much data was great for government surveillance and censorship, and understanding the psyche of its citizens.
Physicians who were on the front lines, who were warning about the pandemic even before it had a name, had their communications censored.
WeChat routinely blocks accounts for discussing issues like the pandemic or human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
They went to my father and threatened him.
Wow.
And said that if your daughter doesn't stop talking about human rights, we are going to persecute your family like in the Cultural Revolution.
After their accounts are blocked, users say that the police come in to question them.
这是说白了，这是集中营。这个时候就通过监控来指定，抓什么样的人。很多人他不知道为什么被抓，不知道把他送到哪里，不知道什么时候放出来。
The problem is the app is so crucial for existence in China that users cannot even give it up.
So China was mostly happy to not interfere and let Tencent continue to grow its dominance, even if it sometimes used anti-competitive tactics. Of course, the CCP were wary of how much power this gave Tencent, which is why their relationship is not as straightforward as you might think. They knew it was important to make sure Tencent was very closely aligned with the CCP, and give them reminders that if Tencent stopped being useful to the Chinese government, Tencent's power could just as easily be taken away. But anyway, let's talk about what this partnership actually means. Tencent's stance is that in order to comply with China's legal and regulatory requirements, it can process and handle private information without requiring user consent in certain situations. Those situations being if the Chinese government wants us to. The CCP reportedly have a direct line to the desks of Tencent product managers and are able to order deletions whenever they want, or monitor specific accounts and specific phrases in both public and private posts. One particularly intimidating policy change in 2017 was that group admins on WeChat were made personally liable for whatever was said on group chats they run. Many simply deleted their groups as a result. Tencent also feeds data to China's social credit scoring system, which can affect what citizens can do. All that information they have, like payment history, real-time location, who you're associated with, can allow the government to create an incredibly detailed picture of who you are, what you buy, and how you behave, thus allowing the government to give you a score of how trustworthy you are as a citizen.
They're constantly monitored by facial recognition cameras that are able to instantly put a face to a name. Now, the Chinese are also ranked. It's aggregating data gathered by banks, private companies, and the state. to rate if someone's a good or bad citizen. A good score brings benefits, but people with low scores lose rights. The cinema names and shames people considered untrustworthy, plastering their details, even their addresses, across big screens. Among them is this journalist Liu Hu. He got a little too close to uncovering corruption among high-profile party members. He was blacklisted. He only realized when he tried to buy a train ticket and was told he was banned from traveling.
But as Tencent grew larger, it seems the CCP became more demanding. Tencent has to employ hundreds, possibly thousands of their own censors, whose job it is to block anti-government posts. Tencent then began deleting lots more posts and suspending accounts that stepped out of line. There are multiple examples of creators, such as blogger Laura Lian, who had hundreds of thousands of fans reading her work, but after making one comment the CCP didn't like, her account was deleted without warning and her income gone. And thus, whilst Chinese citizens clearly enjoy the convenience of WeChat, which admittedly is such a useful app, in the back of people's minds, they're aware that their every move and comment is documented, something which the CCP openly remind people of. Whatever Tencent can see, the Chinese government can see. And so it's kinda crazy that over 1 billion people have opted to sacrifice all aspects of their privacy and free speech for convenience. There's apparently a joke in China that if you order too much food via WeChat, you might get the police tracking you thinking you're harboring fugitives. Now, to be fair here, I really do not believe Tencent set out to create a government surveillance tool. This wasn't some evil plan. Tencent was started by some entrepreneurs wanting to build a business like anyone else, but they managed to create something so popular that the only way the CCP would allow it was if they had some control too. So Tencent didn't really have any choice but to fall in line. Pony is a pragmatic businessman and knows he has to keep the government on side. Hence, when a reporter asked him about censorship at a tech conference, Pony seemed to side with the government by saying, "Lots of people think that they can speak out and that they can be irresponsible. I think that's wrong." Now, to be fair, we have no idea how Pony really feels, but he knows what would happen if he spoke out against the CCP in any way. And the reality is that China's laws require all companies to hand over data if requested. In fact, it's reported that many companies in China have a special office at their headquarters called the Internet Security Police Room, where Chinese public security forces can intervene in company operations or track certain users. Which brings us back to the question, why isn't WeChat as popular outside of China? It's not like Tencent didn't try at all. They do have an English version of their app and even ran big marketing campaigns, like this advert with Messi to try and promote WeChat to the world.
WeChat, the new way to connect. Download it now for free. Free voice and text messages. We love, we share. WeChat.
However, one of the most fundamental reasons for its limited international appeal is clearly because of this surveillance and censorship. Research from Citizen Lab found that the Chinese government does monitor and censor confidential information sent via Tencent's apps, even from users outside of China. For example, I saw a story where one person in a private group chat had sent some news about pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong and was confused when nobody else in the group responded. She only later found out nobody else could even see her messages, as her private messages had been censored without her knowing it. Any taboo issues like mentions of Tiananmen Square or Tibet are censored on Tencent apps, regardless of if you're in China or not. So basically, just because you were using a Tencent app outside of China doesn't mean that Tencent wouldn't still have to supply any of your data to the CCP if they requested it. Remember, Tencent have to stay on China's good side. And thus, many people understandably have some fear about one company, especially a company with ties to the CCP, having all of their info on every aspect of their life. Thus, whilst surveillance and censorship is what allowed Tencent to become dominant in China, as it meant the CCP let them grow so big, outside of China, that has scared users off. But it's not the only reason WeChat isn't as popular outside of China. The second reason is that every country has different requirements. WeChat works so well because it's perfectly tailored to China, but for the app to be so effective elsewhere, every country would need their own WeChat version with services specifically suited to their country. Thirdly, since China is such a massive market, it made more sense for Tencent to go deep into that market where they already had lots of momentum, rather than diverting resources to start from scratch in other countries. After all, China has a population of over 1.4 billion people, more than 4 times the entire population of the US. But the one downside of doubling down on China was that Tencent didn't get the first mover advantage in other countries. So if WeChat did want to try and become more popular in the US, for example, it would somehow have to compete against so many different established companies who've already managed to get their apps ingrained in people's lives. But the final reason WeChat didn't work so well abroad is simply that it's historically been the case that Chinese tech companies struggle outside of China, just as American companies struggle inside China. However, of course, there has been one very notable exception recently: TikTok. A Chinese app which truly has managed to go global, and this leads us to one of Tencent's most fascinating battles.